Welcome, everyone, to Alliance for a Viable Future podcast. I'm your host, Lev Natan, and it's my privilege to be here with Janel Munoa. Hope I pronounced your last name correctly. Forgot to ask ahead of time.
It's okay.
And welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Lev. I'm happy to be here. It's great.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
So before we get into some questions that I have to open the conversation, I'd love to just share some context with our listeners of how we know each other and why I felt inspired to invite you to have this conversation. We know each other primarily because you're a good friend of Sarah, my wife, and then I got to know you through the Rights of Nature work that we've been involved with together. And I was struck by your presence. I mean, just the commitment to show up as a citizen and volunteer to do that work, and then to know the history that you brought of activism with the Great Barrington plastic bottle or plastic bag.
It wasn't that one, actually.
It was the
racetrack home rule
racetrack
petition. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you knew about the other one as well, and that you were not just involved, but one of the core people for making that a successful campaign. So all that really spoke volumes, and then the way that you were present in those conversations, and when you did decide to speak up and share your voice, there was always just a real skillfulness in the way that you took up the space. You said, not too much, not too little. Like, just, you said what you needed to say. It was always valuable, and then you step back, and that was it's such an incredible skill, I guess, and also to have that from a team member. That's the kind of thing that I need in creating something, whether in a business or organization or in a community group. So I was really grateful for that. That's my personal experience. And then it's also wonderful then, in conversations with Sarah, to get to know you. I didn't know much about you. Yes,
Sarah.
we love Sarah. Absolutely. And to know that what you do out in the world as a musician and an indigenous woman and musician who's bringing that all together, the activism, the music, standing as an indigenous Native American woman, and being then oriented to all of that as a vehicle for community building, for healing, for women's work. So here we are. I know that it's a conversation that is going to be beneficial for people to hear your journey. So just wanted to open that up, and anything that you wanted to say, just to presence yourself.
Thanks so much, Lev. That was a really kind perspective. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I'm happy to be in the space of your podcast with its intention. I feel like all of us, the work that I've done with local people, with Sarah, with you, that we're all trying to learn together, and we're all trying to be in circle, and that this is really beautiful to come to this space. I know it's a small circle, it's you and I in this moment, but we were talking earlier about circles and how valuable they are. And I guess one piece that I'd bring forward is this idea of within Western culture, there's this hyper individualism And there's nothing wrong with individualism. That it's a paradox to hold your own autonomy, your own sovereign self, but to also be in community at the same time, and to really be an inquiry all the time, a beautiful inquiry. It can feel rigorous at times, but there's also a flow with it, and to really be mindful about, we can center ourselves. I'm a singer-songwriter, so I know what it's like to, I'm on stage, I'm kind of centering a vision coming through. But then I've learned how valuable it is, and how vital it is to pull back. And to every time I'm doing that, whether it's a band or whether it's a group of amazing citizens, or maybe people within advocacy where they make it really a part of their life, to be in circle, to center a thought, and then to pull back. And I feel like within Western culture there's this scarcity mentality, that if I am not holding space all the time, someone's going to take it from me. When I feel like the spaces that you and I and other people within the regional community that we're in, local community, and my tribe as well, really comes from an indigenous practicality of center yourself, decenter yourself, center yourself, decenter yourself, or be like the ocean. The wave comes in, there you are, you're forward, the wave goes back, and you're taking in and you're receiving, and you're giving space to the land, to whatever, on this metaphor with the ocean, the ground and the shells, the little creatures everywhere doing their thing, and then you pull forward again. So I really take my inspiration from the tribe that I come from, and also from nature, and from experience where I have fallen prey, or maybe experimentation, to what it's like to take up space and to continue to take up space well beyond my welcome. And just how much chaos comes from those moments. And so I try to be mindful of when it may be appropriate for me to step forward. It may be appropriate for me to hang back. And it ends up being this is the amazing thing for me, is that the amazing thing in the sense that it's unfortunate people are not tapping into this sometimes. What it does when you do that is it creates an ebb and a flow, and a sense of community, and a kind of a right relationship between people, places, and things. And you're never in a space of scarcity, because you're listening intuitively and practically, as much as you can, as you're building maybe skill about how to relate to people and things, when to pull back and when to pull forward. And I feel like that's the work I see, it sounds like you do, as we're getting to know each other more. And we really are lucky to be in a community where it is honestly predominantly ancestors from Europe, and it's like a lot less BIPOC people, in the region we're in. But what's beautiful about it is that's changing to a large, to various degrees. I wouldn't say large, but various degrees. And also at least the folks from perhaps settler ancestors are at least a little more mindful about the idea of how valuable it is to be interconnected, that there's such a practicality involved in it. That's what drives me crazy sometimes with Western culture, is we see with the pandemic, it's a very clear distinction of how interconnected we are. It's not this far out hippie point of view. It's not some metaphysical indigenous woo idea. We take it from a heart-centered place, so we're not all up in the mind about it, but we do engage the mind, and we understand it's practical to recognize the interconnectedness, and that it I think I'm I'm kind of going off.
Yeah,
I'm going off.
it's really exciting. And I was just recently reading, I know there's a phrase that I'm not capturing. There's three words that go together, but I could say basically it's indigenous technology, indigenous knowledge. Um, that's like science knowledge, but then there's indigenous scientific knowledge. The indigenous science and the
Mhm.
knowledge that comes along with that, and that's what I hear you talking about in regards to the practicality of it. It's not
Mhm.
quote woo woo. It's on
Mm.
the earth. It worked for uh,
Thousands of years.
millions of two
Yeah.
million years. I have an elder in my life that was talking about the sweat lodge. He's Navajo,
Mm.
and uh, he said the sweat lodge is 2 million years old.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So
Wow.
that's old. That's as old as, like, as soon as human beings knew how to make fire, then to heat the stones, uh, like that.
That
So
makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, and so all over the world, right? There was
Yeah.
something like the sweat lodge. So that's a science of not just survival, but thriving,
Right.
living, and passing down and living a good life,
Mm.
in nature. So uh, yeah, I just wanted to presence that into,
Mm.
presence the conversation that's growing around Indigenous Peoples Day, the events that we're having, and excited to be, including and welcoming and, you
Mm.
know following your leadership, step by step, as we build our natural connection, in that work. Um, so all that being said, I know something I've learned in relationship with Native people is the way that introductions happen. So I'm wondering if you would be willing to, you'd like introduce yourself,
Mm.
and like where you come from, and
Mm.
in that way.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Well, um I'd say that, I'm from a tribe in Southern California. I grew up on the reservation there, and for most of my life, I was schooled there for half of it. So I uh, even spent probably twice as much as my peers from the reservation as well. So I'm really in touch with the land, even though I'm literally across the other side of the country. Um, I guess this may go into woo woo territory, but I always feel like the earth is always that land is always overlaid kind of like with me, like I'm always kind of walking into it as I'm walking anywhere in the world. It's always kind of like a part of me is always kind of basically walking through the reservation too. So I don't feel a disconnect. Basically my tribe is one of the mission Indians from Southern California. All along California, the Spanish developed missions in some of the cities, and it's just dotted all along the coast. We are probably about an hour away from the border of Mexico, and our reservation still sits there. I visit my family via Zoom at the moment, but I would go out there to see them as well, as much as I can every year. And yeah, we call ourselves Luceño. That's what the Spanish name they gave us. And we called ourselves Peyamcowichum, which is people of the West. And and yeah, I'd say thank you for having me. Thank you for holding space with this conversation. It's valuable, I think, anytime we all are visible, and I would say it's extremely important at this time for whoever feels called to, especially a person who's indigenous or a person of color, to step forward and to hold space. So I really greatly appreciate the structure you've created with your podcast and to be welcomed to it. So thank you, love. Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you're welcome, and yeah, thank you for being here, and
Mhm.
taking that opportunity. I always feel like, right now, the work that's here to do is
mm,
in regards to, the future of life is it's a privilege to
mm,
engage with it. It's a opportunity, and then it's a responsibility all at once. All those three things,
mm,
So I'm grateful that you are stepping into that, with with me, right, with
mhm,
us,
mhm.
and you're doing it in your own way already. So that's why we're here.
Yeah,
Yeah. So thank you.
great.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I'm curious if you want to share, um,
Mm,
about your journey with music and
mm,
how it relates to who you are
mhm.
and where you come from and where you're going.
Yeah.
And yeah, curious.
Okay, great, great. Yeah. Um, let's see. I think what's interesting is I was always creative, and what was interesting, I think, on the side growing up, I was sitting around being creative while listening to my aunts and uncles talk about tribal meetings and tribal affairs. So I always had one ear out while I was doing whatever creative bizarre thing I was doing on the reservation as a kid. Um, so I think I always had a
What were
mixture.
some of those bizarre creative things? Yeah.
I don't know. I was wandering the reservation, doing like climbing trees, making up songs. I don't know, drawing on the earth and stuff like that. I was just wildly creative, and my imagination was just through the roof. So I don't know. I was just always up to something, and basically being a part of groups, like maybe you were similar as a kid and you mirror as you get older. The same thing, creating kind of purposeful groups where like I had like my first girl like women's group, I guess, well, girls group when I was younger, and we were all about nature and like studying it. And so so I've always I guess always been doing women's groups, always been doing something creative, singing. And then again, like I said, I was maybe every indigenous kid is this way because there's so many smart indigenous people where you have to almost become an expert about your sovereignty as a tribe and your relationship with US government. Maybe I don't know if I was really that unique, but for me, I was always an earshot of listening to my aunts and uncles and my parents and my grandparents talk about tribal affairs. So I was kind of always, I realize now at this age, always syncing up, being wildly creative, being a part of a group, you know, being on my own, kind of working that sovereignty, that autonomy as an individual, stepping into groups, trying to work with people, trying to do something bigger than all of us and that benefits all of us, while listening to my aunts and uncles and tribal members discuss tribal affairs at the same time. And now I see them all syncing up, like I said. Um, and I but for a while I would just go to tribal meetings and I would study indigenous scholars through books. And I didn't have the guts to get into activism on the ground or advocacy on the ground because two reasons. One is I feel like in Western culture, you have to be an expert. You have to be considered an expert. So I had to decolonize my sense of how I could show up within a team and a group of really passionate people, and how I could show up and be of value in that space without the lens of Western culture telling me I needed to know everything I needed to be a lawyer in order to even enter the room. So there's that piece. And also I knew how much I loved music and how much, if I didn't have to think about these dark things and how to not only create thriving within my tribe along with the tribe, all I would do is sing and create like fun stuff all the time, or like hopefully something beautiful that people would enjoy. So there was that piece. um but I think to I do recognize maybe something, a practicality within Western culture that I do want to give respect to is maybe sometimes the overt sense of expertise is just this idea that you need to be effective or try to work to be effective in your communication. So if I took like maybe the shadow side is overwork and feel shame if you're not like the best, and the positive side within Western culture is learn to develop your craft and be hopefully as clear as possible so people can feel engaged. So that's like the cool part, you know? So I was trying to do that with songwriting and to be able to get effective with that and triangulate being a woman, being indigenous, being from Southern California, I don't know, a myriad of things. I know they're all interconnected, but to be able to synchronize them and alchemize them, and have develop an artistic vision, it took some time. So I did that, and that felt in and of itself really pretty big. So it felt pretty big to pursue visual and musical art because I tend to take things very seriously. So I did that for a while, and like I said, was kind of always inching my way into some kind of advocacy and never feeling quite like I had to really take the plunge in both aspects. I had to really claim space as an artist. No one was going to wave a wand on top of me and say, Janelle, we now dub you worthy of being a singer songwriter and a visual artist. So I had to like try to presence myself. I love that word that I heard you use earlier. I had to try to presence myself in that and like give space to that and kind of and basically build ownership,
Mm,
sovereignty in
mm,
my creative vocal and visual space. And then over time I had to really be with how can I show up in a team of like with a team of really amazing people who are just as passionate as I am about a vision that's bigger than us, and how can we come together, and how do I not, you know, center myself so much, or how do I um the positive way of looking at it is how do I be of service while still being an individual at the same time, you know, in this space. So that's been the alchemy. And yeah, so it's all been kind of like, I guess, two pronged as I've moved down the path of an artist and an advocate, or in advocacy work is probably what I'd like to say. I still have a hard time calling myself an advocate. It's more like I'm with a bunch of cool people trying to make a thing happen, and uh it's for all of us, you know, or whoever wants to join in, you know.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Mm,
Um,
thanks.
Sarah, there was a number of pieces or threads that you wove together that I want to presence or highlight or reflect back.
Hmm.
One is I really appreciate you saying I didn't have the guts to be an activist or whatever to do engage in change work. You were sounds like you were studying it and it was you you were drawn to it. But I really appreciate that because I can resonate with it. It's something
Mm,
when I was growing up, I was reading Malcolm X when I was 10 years old, and then
cool.
I kept
Wow.
on doing that kind of study and watching and getting involved in some ways, but seeing like, whoa, these are really complex situations here. And, I want to see how it all works and before I make a mess. And now and then you also, on the other side, talked about, that shadow of needing to be an expert or perfectionism. So
Mm,
I've kind of cut my teeth on that as well and said, hey, enough is enough. Make a mess now. Get
that's
involved,
great.
to
That's
a
great.
certain extent. But
Yeah, there's a
yeah,
point. There's a point where you just have to get in and be like, sorry everyone, I'm gonna try to
Yeah, yeah, it's good. It's good. That's part of the creative process, and then I appreciated you speaking about then what we're talking about in a sense is claiming space, ownership, sovereignty. So I wanted to connect all those things, and it's not necessarily a question, but what do you see? I guess that's the question. What do you see in regards to all what I just mentioned in regards to leadership?
Mm,
What's your relationship with that word leadership and how it's real, not like an intellectual theoretical thing, but
mm,
in regards to I didn't have the guts, and then at some point I did have the guts, and
mm,
I was able to claim space. To me, that's leadership in the body. Like that's
mm,
not some book about it, but I stepped into the game. I stepped onto the court, onto the playing field.
mhm.
Um, yeah,
So yeah, kind of like, basically, I see what you're saying is, yeah, in regards to what I was saying, yeah, how did I do it? How did I embody it, right?
yeah, with your music, with
Mhm,
working with groups, like what
mhm,
was not necessarily, yeah, sure, how did you do it, and then
mm,
what's the experience of it for you? Because that's
mm,
what we're all uh, on that journey, I think, of stepping up further,
mhm,
wherever
mhm,
we are, wherever I am. There's another step to take into claiming space,
mm.
into having the guts to do it.
Well, I like what you said about the idea that it can be messy. I feel like art can be messy. Life, maybe sounds cheesy, but life can be an art, and art implies not perfection, but an embodiment of all the senses, of the mind engaged, and the gut and the heart engaged, and in that space a mess can be made. This is actually really good. It's getting me thinking. I'm going to step away from this conversation and think on this further. um I think I've tried to make as little mess as possible. um but here's the thing is, I found, whenever I'm a part of a vision that's much bigger than myself, even the music I'm making, I'm always engaged with the fact that I'm in collaboration with a band. I'm usually working with a producer, an engineer, so someone who's capturing the sound, an engineer, a producer who may be helping kind of on the side, giving me a little bit of like prompts and direction. But I'm at the helm, and yet I'm understanding that there's no way I could presence, I love that word, what I'm making on completely on my own. And the best groups I've ever been a part of, and the best spaces to learn any kind of um, group work, and then moments where I step in as a leader at times, or my role is maybe more pronounced at a moment. I find that it's good to have a vision much bigger than yourself. It's good to have something where, for me, I've been able to mess up when it's been a part of people who are, sorry, I'm trying to gather my thoughts. There's like three things popping in right now. Um, when I'm with friends or people with good intentions and good hearts, even if we're all a little messy, there's a lot of forgiveness, because there is an area of trust where you can sense that everyone is there for the right reasons. Like I said, we might have a little bit of a moment. People might feel a little frustrated with each other. There might even be like kind of like a meeting where it got a little heated. But if everyone kind of can circle back in a space where there's really kind of this trust of each other's hearts and and intentions, genuine, not this kind of trust when in your gut someone is not a bad person, but they're just not aligned with the situation. for whatever reason, and you're not a therapist, so you can't begin to even climb in and figure out why, and it's not your place. That's what I found, and I've learned to respectfully just step back from those, not judge them, just discern and step back in those moments. And most of the groups that I've been a part of, the home rule petition, horse racing thing, the group that you and Sarah led with the rights of nature, and then this art installation, BIPOC, kind of activist meets art thing project I'm a part of right now, along with my own music. Each one of those, the intention is so present. The sincerity of everyone within the team is so prominent that it makes any kind of leadership, it makes any kind of, I don't know, bump in the road smoothable. And it makes the opportunity, so back to your thought about your question about leadership, it makes the experimentation of developing leadership skills all the more easier, because you have good people that are really, they care more about something bigger than themselves, and they care about themselves as individuals. So again, that paradox, they're presencing themselves as an individual within a group, and they're not doing that, I don't know, that group think where they're swayed so easily. So everyone's an individual, and then we're all coming together, and we're, again, someone's centering themselves and then someone's pulling back. Someone's centering an idea, someone's pulling back. And in those environments, I develop really quickly in my leadership. And I would just, if anyone wants to be a part of advocacy and wants to develop any kind of skill in management or leadership, I would certainly recommend try to do it with really, if you can find really cool people that care about things that are bigger than themselves. That I've been fortunate to find that, because I've been in communities where that's not always there. People are a little, I don't know what's going on in their lives. They're a little further into some other main point, so I've felt fortunate so far to be in at least 3 projects where people are just very well intended, even if, like I said, even if there's bumps in the road. And like I said, there's like people who have a long game point of view, where they're in it for the long haul, and they're trying to also manage their own self-care as they move through it. And that gets difficult to do, especially in campaign work or any kind of activism work, or even some of the music stuff I do, because it can be so many moving parts, and there's so many people with needs. You go on tour, it can get really complicated and things like that. So I've found building a capacity to be really agile, hopefully, and very open and discerning with, like, where that's a problem, that's not a problem. Let's move forward. Yeah, sorry, I went off a little bit.
No, thank you so much. There were so many gems in what you just were sharing about, and it's I think the most valuable conversations is when we're putting into words in the moment the new thinking that is happening for me and for you through a conversation.
Right.
It's easy to rehash what I already know, but to all the points that you're making, leadership is all about new thinking.
Yeah.
And in it with sincerity, right? Genuinely new thinking. Like, if I'm going to step into my leadership, I don't know what I'm going to say. I'm thinking and creating the new thoughts together in a conversation, in a circle, in a one-on, so I appreciate that. Yeah,
that's great. I appreciate the you mentioning that, because I'll come up, when we're leaders, we're coming up with like kind of shapes of concepts. So some of the structure is there, but it's not always there. And so Yeah, I think it can be real much easier to sound more confident when you're it's all the old paradigm conversation or narrative, but it gets very stale very quickly. So I'm someone who likes to just like let's all compare notes. That's my favorite thing. That's why I love being a part of groups. So I want to learn just as much, and I want to see other people lead just as much as I want sometimes to kind of say, I think the path is over here, you
Mhm.
know. And I love that kind of leadership. Circle leadership is like a
Mhm.
term that I've heard recently that I
Mhm.
really like. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Hmm.
Thank you. Well, I
Yeah.
have one more question.
Mm.
It feels like a big question, and then we can just maybe open it up, and
Mm.
um, maybe we'll have another conversation, uh,
Great.
and then we can kind of wrap it up after that.
Hmm.
And it's a question I had a conversation about this recently, and that brought some new insight. Reparations.
Mm.
The word reparations, what it represents, and in the context of what you're saying about this podcast, and part of the mission being to open this up to diverse voices, um,
Yeah.
as much as possible, and connecting
Mm.
that to claiming space and ownership and sovereignty, uh, and where we are as an organization, uh, we don't have the capacity to give land back to Native people, right?
Right. Right.
We can be supporting and part of that movement of land reparations. And I think part of that movement is airway, reparations. It's like,
Mm.
okay, well, let's
Mm.
support more indigenous voices
Hmm.
to uh, speak and be heard. Uh, so I'm just curious if you wanted to speak about, reparations, and what's your relationship with it, and where do you see it going? Because
Mm.
you know, as a white man in America, who in fourth generation here,
Hmm.
um, I celebrate and stand with the movement for land reparations
Hmm.
in this country. That it's even there's even language for it
Mm. Hmm.
now.
Uh-huh.
I honor that. I acknowledge it. I celebrate it, because there wasn't even language when I was growing up. I never heard anyone talk about that.
It's true.
So I just am opening that conversation, and maybe the distinctions and the connections between you know the land reparations, financial, reparations, and other ways that we can
Mm.
maybe lubricate those possibilities into existence through, like, conversations.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's great. That's good. I think actually in you naming multiple sources of where you're saying the airwaves, giving space in platform, through money, through land. Um, I found that it seems like the concern about how are we going to heal as a culture, how are indigenous people going to heal with Western culture, and how are reparations going to happen. It needs to come from, I'm just one person, so what I'm glad you brought forward the idea that it's a big question. So reparations is a big um question that definitely not just one indigenous person could answer, and not just one person of color could answer, and not just one conversation between, you know any two people or more could answer. I found that anytime there's a wrongdoing, or yeah, hurt has been done, that it's a process, and that what needs to be the reality is that everyone involved, or as much as possible, as many people as possible need to be involved in the conversation of healing. And the idea with reparations is, I think it needs to come from as many sources as people could be an inquiry about. For instance, I know I'm just one person, and I think the land reparations, I know a few people of color who've received land and are doing beautiful things with it. I think you may know some of them within the region that we live in. I've been a part of communities where money has been given as well, and it's a beautiful thing. I would also say reparations for me would be continued things like that, but it would be vying for the revisionist textbooks to no longer be in play, where we all face up to the genuine history of the United States and colonialism and imperialism. That would be a form of reparations that I feel would be to put energy into how can we start teaching our children the real history, so we then can learn, to various degrees, do grieving acknowledgments, and then how can we move forward as, again, sharing our technologies with each other. It's a shame that when settlers stepped on the land that there wasn't a thought of, here's our technologies, cool. Maybe I'm speaking about it like too much like a hippie, but cool, here's our technologies. And then these other folks that are clearly on the land, they have their technologies. What if we mix them together? What if we tried to learn from each other? I wished that would have occurred, as opposed to what happened, which was, with displacement of morality and ethics to move across West and to displace actual people that were on the land, and to see this, to have the story about this land to be considered virgin land, to be that no one was on, to be dominated. It's a very like toxic masculine point of view, and I know so many men who do not practice that headspace, but that exists out there. And yeah, so I would say I kind of went far and wide, but I would say reparations would be exactly in the point that you had made, is being an inquiry where reparations within each person in America that's benefiting from indigenous land being stolen, treaties that are vast amounts of treaties that are not acknowledged or honored in any way, land still being stolen through major companies, through pipelines that are able to go through and decimate natural resources for indigenous people. Continued kind of basically race, environmental racism shown up in racism that shows up in the form of environmental dominance and taking of resources. So I am going, like I said, far and wide, but it's a conversation that I feel like people may get overwhelmed about. But I found that when there's a wound, the only way is through. And not the quicker in the sense of aggressive way, but as soon as I can be willing to face the wrong I've done or the wound I have within, the faster I can get to some kind of balance, and I end up actually feeling alleviated. I end up feeling over time filled up. And if I take my practice with righting the wrongs that I've done or healing the wound that I have within, if I move forward with that and make that a practice, I actually build capacity. And I think that's a thing. That's I'll wrap it up soon because I know we're we're short on time, but I would say for me, just as an individual, I would wish that more people had capacity to handle the history and to face the history. That would be a reparations that would mean a lot to me personally, because I see people who can't even handle things that I've had to know since I was
Mhm.
7, 8, 9, 10, as a young person, that grown adults cannot handle the history
Mhm.
of something that my tribe already has full knowledge of, and is experiencing to various degrees the repercussions still of a history.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Thank
Yeah,
you. Thank you for those words.
sure.
I
Yeah.
really appreciate it. So
Mm,
articulate to, and
mm,
it's not easy. I don't want to, yeah, I just want to not take it for granted that you're willing to say those
mm,
things and
mm,
take up the space to go into that. So I
mm,
appreciate it.
mm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and I feel like, you know, it deserves a part two of this podcast. I've done some part twos with guests, and if you'd be open to that, maybe you don't have to
Great.
commit right now, but I think it's a beautiful opportunity to give this conversation space, because
Mm,
it's something that, as an organization, we're committed to, and
mm,
the commitment is truly about listening and learning. You know,
mm. It's great.
and I just want to say, when you were speaking about facing it,
Mhm,
just allowing it, in facing it, you know happens more quickly. The healing begins. It made me think about the 12 steps.
mm,
Righting a wrong, that's one of the 12 steps of addiction. Any alcohol, drugs, any of the 12 step journeys, that's one of them, to clean it up. What mess have I made? That's not a creative mess. We spoke about the creative mess, and even in that process, sometimes there's wrongs that have to be cleaned up.
mhm,
But certainly in the 12 steps, when I've been unconscious
mhm,
in my life personally, and
mm,
then I become more conscious. Now I have to see, oh wow, I really made a mess with that situation or that relationship, and I need to go clean it up in order for me to move forward and be a different way in the world. And so that's what I'm hearing you say, and that's what I've also learned about the collective uh, responsibility of reparations, truth, and reconciliation. That whole journey. So I just wanted to
mm,
acknowledge that, appreciate
mm.
it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I would just say one more piece about that is like the same within psychology. That like I've only dabbled a little bit in reading. Is the idea that shame? I don't know if shame is a very effective emotion in even something as horrific as what has occurred on this land, but certainly whenever I've done a wrong, a certain I always think the right amount of guilt that's going to get me to be active in an inquiry about how I can right the wrong. So not guilt to the point, like again, in that space of shame that is really debilitating, and it just ends up, yeah, creating a darkness. But enough guilt, if I can feel enough guilt that it's going to be mobilizing, and yeah, though there's a little bit of that wound of some some responsibility, or that if I can just move into that and build capacity for it,
Mm-hmm.
and again, with like I said, just use these emotions, use the pain to mobilize yourself, then that pain is effective.
Mm-hmm.
Then that pain is actually healing, because the other one, the shame area, is not healing. It's like I said, debilitating. Use like the pain you feel to mobilize you into a wider sense of awareness and community and interconnectedness, while being autonomous at the same time, and building that capacity to to again think of yourself and care for yourself, but where in myself do I have capacity at this time? And it's difficult because we're all learning how to do that. We all have, I think, a lot of histories of codependency, whether it's racial or not, or where within our own families. So, you know, the question and the inquiry of how much to give and how much to hold for ourselves so we're sustainable as an individual, that's what we're all in conversation about right now. And there's no shame around that. We're all, again, trying to be a part of a circle, comparing notes of how this worked. I'm not sure that maybe this worked. Oh, I tried this the other day, this worked. And we're all gathering pieces up together and sharing. And that's why things like this podcast and conversations about community and individualism and how all of those things are kind of working together, and how to do them and be in right relationship with them is a really exciting thing to be in, and a really exciting moment in time, because these things are actually happening out in the open air in public. And yeah, I just feel really happy to be in the space and to be able to take up a bit of space as an Indigenous woman, as a creative person, and someone who cares very much about um, everyone feeling free and everyone feeling sovereign.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Amen.
Mm.
I just want to repeat those words, that
Mm.
you care about everyone feeling free and
Mhm.
everyone feeling sovereign. I really appreciate that as
Mhm.
a place to just take a breath together. And just,
Yeah.
if you want to share any last thoughts with our listeners,
Mm.
inspiration that you're feeling in the moment,
Mm. Mhm.
this end of the conversation.
Okay. Great. Great. Um, hmm. I would just say, I would say, I would say circle up. If what Lev and I talked about today feels like it resonates, um, recognize maybe the people who want something bigger than themselves, while again being grounded in themselves and definitely having their autonomy and sovereignty, but wanting to move together interconnectedly, and go for it, because it feels really good, and it's really liberating, and it's very connecting. I think that's a thing that we all need more of, in this very globalized world. Ironically, more like grounded, circle up connections.
Mm.
That's what I'd say. Thanks.
Yeah. Amen. Thank you again.
Yeah, sure. Sure. Great.